my teacher, oh, there we go. Sorry about that. My teacher was Roger Woolger, and he wrote a book called The Goddess Within. And it was very much about working with the archetypes of the feminine. And I attended, he invited me to kind of assist him on one of the workshops on that workshop. And from that moment on, I think I was absolutely kind of captivated. And it kind of made so much sense, because what I've learned and understood over the years is that the way to, there's much talk about the masculine and the patriarchy, etc. To me, the way to heal the masculine is through the feminine. And so very often people keep, so I've been teaching goddesses and working with the divine feminine since 2006. And people keep saying, when are you going to teach a course about the gods? And my answer to that is, if I started teaching a course about the gods, we would lose the essence of what we need first to learn about the feminine. It would almost like overshadow. So we have to go back to the, to me, we have to start with the goddesses. And there's so much that needs to be done in relation to the feminine. And when I talk of the feminine, it's beyond gender, it's the feminine principle. And the goddesses, the Greek goddesses, are just ways of actually making sense of it. You know, we can talk about divine feminine, but, you know, what does it actually look like? What does it actually mean? And equally, in my work over the years, I have had a lot of women that have come to me and said, oh, you know, I want to work, I know you work with goddesses, I want to work with the feminine because I need to be more feminine. And that, when a woman says that, I almost like want to go, almost like say, no, you don't. Because we've been, and I'll talk kind of like in the we kind of like perspective, is almost like there's a whole misunderstanding of what it is to be feminine. You know, there's, and the same thing with what it is to be a mother. What is it to be feminine? So you get told all of these sort of stereotypical ways of what you should be. A problem start if you kind of think, well, that's not me. I can't tell you. So you kind of, there's so many ways that there are to be a mother. And yet we're sold this specific way of what a good mother is, of what it is to be feminine. Again, there's this idea of what it is to be feminine. And all of the goddesses have their own ways of, for example, being a mother, being feminine. They're all feminine. They're all aspects of the, let's say, the great mother, the divine feminine. And somewhere along the way, it went a little bit wrong. And for safekeeping, it's almost like, if you think of, let's say, the divine mother, the great mother as a circle, and a way for my understanding and how I describe it is, for safekeeping is to divide the feminine into, or give the goddesses different qualities of that part of that whole circle. So if you damage, if one is wounded, still you have the whole. And we all carry different aspects of the feminine. And some you will absolutely relate to. Some of them you will go, they mean absolutely nothing to me whatsoever. and others you will just go, that is totally me. So it's, yes, it's an archetype. So the goddesses, Greek goddesses, people say that was 2000 odd years ago. How are they still relevant today? And if we understand that the goddesses were basically kind of like, we're made up of stories. They were stories. They are goddesses. They are kind of, they were never, let's say, Athena didn't actually exist. She was a mythical character, kind of Zeus, etc. So they are archetypes. And archetypes actually are blueprints of behavior. In ancient Greece, they would watch when a child started to grow, they would watch their behavior, the key point is natural behavior. And they would notice how you played and how you interacted. And they would understand that, and they would see certain behavior patterns, and they would say, this girl is a daughter of Athena. This daughter is a daughter of Aphrodite, or this boy is a son of Zeus. And based on your natural instincts, your natural behavior, that's how you would then be educated, because they would see that was your natural behavior. Now, I've got to do a whole completely different talk on what we could do if we followed a pattern in education, and what a liberation it would be is if we followed that aspect of education by natural behavior. We'd have a whole different generation. Anyway, so based on that, you would know, let's say, you would align yourself to. And to me, the idea and how I work with the kind of the goddesses, the archetype, is I see them as archetypes. And archetypes are universal. So whilst I'm talking to you about the Greek goddesses, for those of you who know the different goddesses, whether they're goddesses like kind of like from Brazil, or the goddesses of Mesopotamia, or the Indian goddesses, you will notice that you can say, oh, this one sounds like Lakshmi. From Indian goddesses, oh, this one sounds like Iemanjá from kind of Brazil. And so it's not, so whilst I give them names, it's a way of helping us understand. It's like putting on a set of clothes. It's having this energy, which we might call the feminine, but it's dressing her up in certain clothes with certain stories to help us understand ourselves and understand the feminine within all of us. Kind of one of the things that I find is really important when we're listening to the stories of the goddesses and saying, oh yeah, that one, I really relate to that one. This one makes sense to me. It's also thinking about, well, what about the women in my family? What about the women I grew up with? What about my mother? What about my grandmother, my aunts, etc.? Because we can, it's really interesting thinking about what kind of goddess environment we grow up in, and does that affect our natural behavior? Maybe I grow up, maybe like if I'm a woman, I grow up in an environment which actually is very focused on Athena, and yet maybe I'm a natural Demeter. And so I feel conflicted, because you could say they are quite opposing in their way, what their needs are. Neither of them are wrong. And from a man's perspective, obviously I can look and say, well, what kind of goddesses did I grow up with? And how does that influence my own relationship with women? And also, how does it influence the feminine and how easy I can access and feel comfortable with the feminine within myself? So it's always, so that's why I love working with the Greek goddesses, because they have such wonderful stories. You can tell so many wonderful stories with them, kind of, and through their stories, you could say that we can relate to them. We start to understand who they are. And if we go back to what I call kind of the Great Mother, the divine feminine, and we look at how we've, in a way, dissociated over 2,000 odd years. If we look back and see the stories and look at the kind of some of the stories, as if we take Christianity and look at how gradually it's dissociated us from Mother Earth. Kind of prior to Christianity, we were very much kind of, as your cultures was very earth-based. We worshiped the earth, Mother Earth. And then all of a sudden, there was the Father Sky. God was in heaven. So we were looking up, and we were almost like looking up in the opposite direction away from the feminine. And, when we talk about, when people think about the devil and they talk about hell, they always point downwards. And you're actually pointing downwards to Mother Earth. So it's this subtle dissociation from the feminine. So and again, the feminine as a principle is about being comfortable in my body. Whereas if my spirituality and where I find connectedness and spirituality is up there, I'm going out of my body. So there's so many subtle ways that we have been dissociated from the Great Mother, from the divine feminine. And that's why I think more so now than ever, there's such a need to reconnect, to really kind of, all of the goddesses have their strengths, and all of the goddesses have their wounds too. And so I'm going to tell you some of the aspects of the goddesses. And by all means, kind of as we're going through, if you have any questions, just write them in the chat, and I'll keep my chat open. Then I can see the questions as we go through, and then see how we go towards the end, and then maybe I'll invite some of you to we can have a dialogue. Thank you, Joe. I love telling stories. It's interesting because when I was at school, kind of on my report, it used to say Mark would do really well if he focused more, if he didn't have such an active imagination. And I would love to go back to see some of my teachers and say, look, do you know what? It's because of that active imagination is why I'm doing what I'm doing now. So it was a gift that was there from the beginning. Anyway, let me tell you about the goddesses. So we'll do them in the order. You can probably see I kind of put all the goddesses behind me. I kind of thought, well, we're going to talk about the goddesses, so let's make them present. So I put them in my background. So let's talk about Aphrodite, because like I said to you, when I've seen a lot of women and they say, oh, I want to be more feminine. And it's very often, it's Aphrodite's version of the feminine that they're thinking of. Or let me rephrase that, society's version of Aphrodite, because let's say her way of being has been slightly distorted. So Aphrodite, yes, she is the the goddess of love and beauty, but she is the goddess of love, and it's the sense of love in any shape or form. And love is, if you think, when you're under, that term, when we met, it's like we were in a crowded room, but it was like our eyes met across the room and as if no one was there. That's an Aphrodite moment. It's when you're captured by someone's gaze, or someone's gaze is upon you. It's Aphrodite because of her connection with love, she has that ability to bring something to life. Kind of when you are in her presence, you feel animated, you feel alive, you feel embodied. Aphrodite always she brings that real kind of feel good. And one of the aspects where, to me, Aphrodite is very wounded in society is this whole thing of anti-aging. We have a thing about, kind of wherever you look, there's all these, everything is about anti-aging, look younger, do this, everything, not, whereas Aphrodite, her aspect of her beauty is beauty however you are, but a natural beauty. Kind of, she exudes beauty, but she doesn't need to reverse it, because she knows she's beautiful. A true kind of like Aphrodite, let's say a true Aphrodite woman who really carries that energy well, she doesn't care, it's not that she cares about her appearance, but she doesn't do anything to dramatically change it. So she wouldn't, let's say, a wound of Aphrodite may be if we decide to have any kind of surgery or facial kind of something to change how we actually look. It's not about being anti, but it's actually about Aphrodite. It says, celebrate your beauty, be who you are. If we look at some of the images and paintings back in kind of Rubenesque times, they are not, the body shape is very different to, and what was considered beauty is very different to what it is now. Aphrodite says, own your beauty and show it proudly, own it. Whoever you are, whatever your age, whatever shape, size, whatever, your body is beautiful. You are beautiful, and bring out the natural aspect of that. Aphrodite is about when, let's say, on a practical terms, Aphrodite, you always know an Aphrodite woman because she always has a mirror very close to her front door. I remember talking to a lady and she said, no, I'm not Aphrodite. And I said, so when you leave, I said, would you go to the shops would you just get ready, walk out the door? She said, oh no, I would definitely have to have earrings. And it was like, Aphrodite through and through. Yeah. It's not that other goddesses don't take care of themselves. It's just those little subtleties that you can see the difference. So Aphrodite is, if we're ever stuck about our beauty and we have insecurity, Aphrodite is the one to call upon. She says, you are beautiful, whoever you are, however you are, and never let anyone tell you otherwise. And certainly don't be defined by something on the outside, what other people say is beautiful. So hang on, I'm trying to see who's behind me. Well, okay, let's talk Artemis. So Artemis is she is she is very natural. So, kind of, if we're talking about leaving the house, Artemis would not care. She would just kind of like just pull on clothes and just walk out the door. That's her thing, you know. And equally, she wants clothing that is very easy and practical. You kind of, that's what she wants. Equally, Artemis loves being in the country. You know, doesn't like being in the city. The city will kind of like, or if she's in the city, she needs greenery somewhere. And what I was telling you is a good friend of mine who is very Artemis, and her sister is very Aphrodite. And her sister kept saying to her, you need to dress more. You need to wear a dress now and again. And so one day she said, okay, I'll come shopping with you. And she went shopping and she said, try on this dress. It was a dress with very floral prints. And my friend who was Artemis, she put the dress on and she said, when I looked in the mirror, I looked like a man in drag. Because she said, it is, and yet when she put on her clothes, which to me are very Artemis, she looked, her beauty just shone through. So again, that's what I'm saying is about they dress differently, they have different styles, they have different ways of being, and that's what she feels comfortable with. So Artemis is very much about actually, you know, kind of, she's the athletic one. She wants to be, that's why she wears kind of easy, comfortable clothing. She wants to get, everything's got to be practical. And also for Artemis, her female friends are very important to her. It's like kind of, she has this like sisterhood. So yes, she can be betrayed by her partner, which yes, is painful, but being betrayed by her female friends is worse. It cuts much deeper, shall we say. And so Artemis gives us that ability, that very independent nature. And following on with these kind of independent goddesses, and the thing about Aphrodite, Artemis, and our next one is Athena, is they are very independent. And the thing of it is when it comes to partners, very often that's the very thing that their partners find attractive about them. And yet, as soon as they are with them, they want to take all of that away. So it's a bit like a butterfly collector, which is, it's for Aphrodite, Artemis, and Athena. And, you know, kind of talking of Athena, my favorite quote with Athena is if she were putting, let's say, if she putting an ad on some of these dating apps or in a dating column, it would simply say, superheroes only need apply. Because, you know, she's the warrior goddess. At the, you know, I don't know if any of you, if you have Netflix, but at the moment I'm really enjoying a program on Netflix called The Indian Matchmaker, and there are so many women on there that I'm listening to them. That's, I'm an independent businesswoman. I've got my own business and I like my independence, and I'm thinking, you are so Athena, and I'm listening, watching the men that they're being set up with, and it's like, not a chance. So, you know, Athena is very independent, you know, kind of. So Artemis loves to be in the country, but Athena, she likes projects. It's that sense of kind of keep Athena very happy and very busy. It's remembering the story of Athena, that she was born out of Zeus's head. So, you know, kind of Athena will want to talk about what do you think rather than what do you feel. So Athena is kind of very active, dynamic, and wants to get things done. And so let's say Aphrodite, if you said to Aphrodite, what's your favorite day? And say, oh, a day at the spa. and I'm using very kind of big so stereotypical examples. So Aphrodite would say, my favorite day would be to go to a spa, and Athena would say, well, why do you want to waste your time doing that when you could be doing something practical? You know, so it's understanding. It's what I love about the understanding the goddesses is it helps you to understand the people in your, or certainly women in your life as well. Because it's like, oh, okay, we can have these, we can be really friendly, but fundamentally we can see these differences and all of them are okay. So Athena loves to kind of the practical. She's very much kind of, I want to be a businesswoman. And again, over the years, I can't tell you how many Athena women I've met who will come and they feel they're almost like on the verge of depression or taking medication or something, or certainly on the verge of depression. And it's because, and you talk to them and they say, well, you know, I've just had a child, my baby is now about 2 or 3. And, you know, they're saying, I have, you know, I feel really guilty because I have the privilege of that. I can stay at home and look after my baby. And then they say, but I feel so embarrassed because if I hear one more thing about baby talk, I think I will kind of go crazy. And they feel so guilty about that because they kind of almost like want to say, well, just get me back into work. And so it's understanding that whilst Athena can be, all of the goddesses are good mothers, but Athena is much happier when she's a working mum. Which, if you look at over the history, you know, kind of maybe 20, 30 years ago, that was kind of when women were starting to really take a stand and go to work. They were very often very judged of how can you possibly do that you're leaving your child with someone else. Now it's almost like swinging a little bit the other way. And moving on to Demeter, who loves to stay at home, who loves kind of like, the best way of describing Demeter is Earth Mother. If you have a friend who, when you go to their house, you're always well nourished, there's always plenty of food, you know, kind of, and you always go home with Tupperware full of kind of all food packages, then you know you've been in the presence of Demeter. And so she loves kind of like to be at home. So in that time of when it was seen more to stay at home, now imagine the kind of, like I said, the stereotype of what it means to be a good mother is, if you read the list of what it means to be a good mother, that list pretty much covers Demeter. Stay at home, look after the children, take care of your husband or partner, etc. And that very much homebody. Now, if you are Artemis, Athena, Aphrodite, or any of the other goddesses, you are going to feel you will always feel somehow not quite enough as a mother because you don't fit Demeter's blueprint. So that can lead, because that's the blueprint, that's the stereotype of this is what makes a good mother. And all of the goddesses are great mothers, but they just mother in a very different way. And equally, the one thing Demeter can do is she can teach us very much how to nourish ourselves. You're kind of like, so are you the kind of person that when you feel hungry, you'll just think, I'll just have a coffee? Or do you take time to actually nourish yourself? And really, nourish is not only feeding, but do you take time for yourself to really allow yourself that self-care? You kind of, that's one things that Demeter, some of the goddesses can equally, as much as they can do for others, they can also teach us about how we can be for ourselves as well. And so after Demeter comes Hera. Now, Hera, she is queen of heaven. In Greek mythology, she is the queen of heaven. And unfortunately, she's always, in Greek mythology, she always seems to be battling or suffering because of Zeus's antics. Now, whilst we talk of ancient Greece and we think of the gods and the goddesses, way before the gods became elevated to the platform they are in the Greek pantheon, Zeus was just a man who was there. He was a god that he wasn't in the position, it was sort of prior to what we know as ancient Greece. Hera existed in her own right, and equally things like nowadays we talk about inheritance, and it used to be that it was through only through the father's side. In ancient Greece, everything was inherited on the mother's side, because in that way, and when I talk about ancient Greece, I'm not talking about the boundaries and the country lines that we know as today, let's say between Greece and Turkey. So ancient Greece, Mesopotamia was very, very large. So it's not, when I talk about ancient Greece, I'm not talking about the border lines of what we know as Greece today. Hera was a goddess in her own right. She did have a partner. Zeus was there, but not in. It was only when ancient Greece, but they suddenly became much more difficult. Anyway, Hera is very much the sense of tradition, and when it says family, it's about the sense of longevity. So when it says the goddess of tradition, she's about marriage and commitment. So you could say that today we carry society in the industrialized world, we carry a wound of Hera, because, people don't want to commit. Commitment is not just kind of commitment to about family tradition, but it's about commitment. We live in the industrialized world. We live in a kind of throwaway society. Oh, it's not working, whether it's a partner, whether it's white goods, it's like, oh, we won't take time to repair them, we'll just get rid of them and buy and get a new one. Whereas Hera is very much about tradition, heritage, and longevity. Kind of when we take time to learn, people want things, they want to learn things immediately. They don't take the time to learn and really understand the depth. So it's that sense of, if you want to make a commitment to something, Hestia is your goddess to call upon. Sorry, Hestia, not Hera, is your goddess to call upon. She's the one who actually helps us actually finish something and commit to it. And equally, she is the queen of heaven. And Hestia is an interesting, well, no, actually, we'll leave Hestia till, we'll switch things around a bit. I'll leave Hestia till last. I want to talk about Persephone now, because Persephone is equally a queen, but she is queen of the underworld. And when I talk about underworld, I'm not talking about hell. I'm talking about, and it's, if we put it in a Jungian perspective, Persephone is the goddess of the unconscious. Everything that is not seen, everything that is invisible. it was very often said that at the end of life, it would be Persephone who would be there to meet you, to meet the soul, to escort the soul through kind of like the underworld. Underworld, again, just to clarify, I'm not talking about hell or that perception of hell. It would be very much that transition. And Persephone, and it's interesting, she is one of the only goddesses that can function between almost like conscious and unconscious, because her story is the fact that she, she was taken by Hades into the underworld as a young girl, and she comes back for 6 months of the year to her mother Demeter, and for that period of time, she always returns. So springtime is recognized as the time of when Persephone is returning to, let's say, this world, and autumn is the time when she's returning to the underworld. And what's interesting, which we will go much more into these myths and the meanings and their relevance to the feminine, is what's really interesting is that when she's back here in this world with Demeter, she's always a young girl, she's always a young virgin, but it's only when she's in the underworld does she become a fully embodied woman, and she is queen of the underworld. So, there's a whole dynamic about where she exists, and why is it that when she's in this world, she returns to being a young girl. There's almost like an innocence, but when she's back in the underworld, she's a fully embodied woman. She comes here. Hecate kind of comes into the myth of with Demeter. There's a question in the chat about Hecate, and Hecate exists in the myth between when Demeter, so when Persephone was taken away, and Demeter Demeter is the myth is that Demeter is the one who controls the seasons, and that she was so distraught and grief-stricken and also angry that she stopped all the crops growing, and in that time, in her grief, she met Hecate, who was kind of a visionary, and so she's recognized as maiden, mother, and crone. So it's all the phases that you could say that Persephone and Demeter go through. So she is, why she's not here in this 7 goddesses, she's a very important character in the Persephone Demeter story, and a person in her own right, which we go into more. So Persephone is, and on a day-to-day perspective, Persephone really she really governs our intuition. And if you want to think about the wounding of Persephone over the years, over the hundreds of years, and think of all the kind of like the inquisitions and the witch trials and all the kind of like, so this huge kind of almost like suppression and destruction of the feminine. And so is it any wonder that I would say men and women, but so almost like mistrust that very intuitive part, which is because if we think about the feminine as a concept, it's very much about being receptive. It's like being a vessel. So something, I always think about intuition is something is coming in, something is entering in. Now, if in the collective unconscious, we've got this thing of what the persecution of the feminine for using that intuition, there's going to be it's going to be really difficult to trust, because equally there's been the industrialized and almost like the balance between right and left brain, which has been a fight. And that's the industrialized aspect, of which is the kind of saying, Science, while science is important, it shouldn't overtake. It's more like Persephone helps us balance that. To me, Persephone and, well, Persephone and Athena, you might say, are at odds with each other. A simple example would be someone says, what are we going to do today? Persephone says, well, let's just make it up as we go along, which is like, to Athena, who says, we need a plan. So you might see that if you have in a workplace, imagine that. If you've got a Persephone and Athena working together, they are going to clash. It's not saying one is better, one is wrong, and one is right. It's just that they have very different approaches to the same thing. And I think one of the benefits of understanding the goddesses is helping to understand different people's behavior. And equally, imagine that you grow up in an Athena family and you're naturally Persephone. You will forever feel that those those intuitive feelings, that feeling that you have, that connection to something greater, there's always something wrong. And I think, kind of like, and it's Persephone that very much connects into the things like nowadays, there's so much around kind of mental illness and Persephone is there. And I think it's because of the wounds we all carry of Persephone that actually some of that is happening. Not all. Let's talk about Hestia. Now, Hestia, the reason I kind of put her to 7th, and mainly because Demeter and Persephone are mother and daughter, and Hera also was queen of heaven, and as is Persephone is queen of the underworld. But Hestia. Now, there are very few images, statues of Hestia. You might know her in in Roman mythology, she's known as Vestia. So you might have heard of the Vestal Virgins. And in Hestia is, what I like about Hestia is she's a mix of Aphrodite, Artemis. She brings them all together. Hestia is the one who, so where you might know Hestia is, if you wanted to, where have I put goddess of the sacred hearth? Let me put it another way. Hestia is could be described as goddess of the housework. Because when Hestia is about the sacred hearth. So Hestia, when I talk about housework, is when Hestia is present and let's say she's cleaned the house. It's not because she has to, but because it makes it sacred. And I'm sure you all know how your house or your home feels after you've cleaned it. Kind of Hestia was also, whilst there wasn't so much a human form of Hestia, you would see her in any of the temples, any temples you enter, and there's a flame. That's the symbol of Hestia. So Hestia is not only the sacred hearth, but is the sacred flame. So in ancient Greece, there was the agora, so the marketplace, and there was always the flame. There was always the burning, the hearth. And Hestia is also responsible for housewarming gifts. The term originally, so a gift of a ritual of Hestia is when a woman got married, her mother would carry the burning coals from her house, from the hearth of her house to her daughter's new house. And it was only when the flames were burning in the hearth would the house become a home. which is actually the origins of a housewarming gift. Because I'm not too sure if your friends would be too happy if you turned up with burning coals. I don't think they'd quite get the sentiment. So every time you know, kind of like when we're doing ritual, when we're doing any kind of something which needs that little bit of specialness, that little bit of sacredness. So when we light incense, when we light candles, who we're actually invoking from the goddess perspective is we're invoking Hestia. It's that kind of purity. It's bringing in the sacred. And probably as we've gone through, you can say, oh yeah, I really kind of identify with that one. Nope, I do not understand any of that one. You know, like I said, so there'll be some we really connect with. Others, oh, I don't really understand that. No, that's not me. And others which, yeah, okay, because we're actually we're made up of all 7, but there's just some we will have more of an affinity to than the others. And if you're unsure, it's the way to check it out is almost like ask yourself, okay, what about if I had no choice but to be Demeter? Then you'll know whether she's your goddess or not. What about if I had no choice but to be Athena? What about, you know, kind of say, you might say, what about if I had to be Hera, just Hera? Hera is, you might say in the workplace, she's the boss. You know, she's queen of heaven, so she might as well be queen of a business, queen of company. You know, and if she is queen of a business, if she owns her business, she will treat everyone like family. And unfortunately, with Hera, because we still don't do well in society with powerful women, so very often Hera is demonized. If we might look at things like movies, such as if you look at the most common movies of powerful women, they're always if you look at things like The Devil Wears Prada, if you look at there was a great fabulous film, a really hero film. Oh yes, it was back in the 60s. It was a film called She with Ursula Andress, and literally it's an amazing kind of, there's this wonderful quote, and it just says, she who must be obeyed. And that is so that's the only line I remember from the film. But you know, so imagine if you were that. And sometimes if you're much more maybe Persephone, who's much more happier sort of being part of something but not being so visibly upfront, to thought of being Hera is a huge challenge. And so it's a way of helping you know which one do you really kind of identify with. And it's also thinking about, well, which goddesses did I grow up with? Like I said, because sometimes we grow up in kind of an environment, and like I said, maybe we adapt and we take on another goddess to protect the one we actually are. You know, so it's worth sometimes looking and just thinking, okay, who were they? Who were the women in my as I was growing up? And what did I learn? What was I told? What was the view of how it is to be a woman? Or from a man's perspective, how was it about being, how do you treat a woman? And actually, how were the women treated? How did I view? So how did I internalize the feminine? And and Susan, in answer to your question, will there be a replay? Yes, it's going. The reason it's being recorded is because it's going on to YouTube, I think. So yes, there is. Yes, exactly, Joanna. The in the film She, there was this flame of eternal youth. So it was that, absolutely, that sense of, it's definitely worth a watch. She is kind of like from the hero perspective. In the course that's starting in September, we're going to be going, each module is 3 hours, and we're going to be really going in depth into two goddesses on each module. And there'll be kind of handouts, but also invitation to do personal work as well. Because whilst we, it's understanding the wounds we carry of the goddesses and how they play out in our life and how they influence our relationships, not just romantic relationships, but also our relationship in the world in general. And, so we'll be looking at, whilst we look at the strengths of the goddesses and how we can embrace and build upon the strengths, importantly, we'll also be kind of looking at the wounds of the goddesses, because I think it's quite important to keep the balance of saying, well, okay, these are the great strengths, but we need to acknowledge the wounds in order to be able to build upon the strengths. And I would say, in my years of working with the goddesses, I would say probably one of the biggest wounds that I've seen. Yes, we know, absolutely, we can talk about the patriarchy and how the patriarchy and what it's done to the feminine and women. But I would say probably a much deeper one, and it's not taking away anything from the other one, but probably a much deeper one, is what other women do to other women. And somehow that seems to cut much deeper, and that's one of the things that during the course that we go into, to look at that deep wound kind of from women to women, and how that actually in a way can stop that whole kind of let's say the resurgence, the re-emergence of the feminine. I believe it's there, and I believe it's happening. Looking at it on a collective level, that's what I kind of think there's so much happening at the moment, is because it's that re-emerging of, kind of like now, even just looking at it on a society level. Like, for example, as I was reading, like here in the UK, they were saying there's now people are encouraging people to start to mend things, instead of just getting like, there's, you can look on YouTube and there's videos how to fix your washing machine, how to fix your vacuum cleaner. I'm using all these sort of like white goods, but there's a part of me which is going, yes, kind of hera is coming back. So to me, that's a sign of there's a beginning of the feminine is starting to emerge. And sometimes in these great calamities, kind of the pandemic and everything that took place in that, sometimes if we look at it from a very collective, on a real wider perspective, beyond the personal, we can say that to me, it is the beginning. And there was a lot of the feminine in there, a lot of kind of Mother Earth re-emerging, of kind of something was starting to come back. Heidi, your question about, Heidi asks, is Medusa a Greek goddess? She's not. She does have a very, very big part to play in Athena's story, because if you look at the symbol of Athena, Athena always carries on her shield, she always carries a symbol of Medusa's head. And we'll be looking at the symbolism of that and the reason why she has such a strong connection. And actually the story of Medusa, because whilst Medusa is recognized as a Gorgon, we always think of Medusa, of the one with the snakes coming out of her head. However, that wasn't how she was always. There's another story that sits behind her, and there's a really interesting dynamic between her, Medusa, and Athena, and how sometimes we carry that wound, or what I call the almost like the Medusa Athena wound. Again, you might say that's a wound from a feminine to feminine. Can you let me just have a look at this? Can you comment on hero being in the stem of the word heretic? I heard that related to historical time when there's went from matriarchal to patriarchal. History becomes Joanna, I'm going to have to look for that. I don't know the answer to that. If you can see the chat, Joanna's asking about, can you comment on hero being the stem of the word heretic? Good question. You've got me curious, and I'm going to look once we finish this talk. I'm going to go and search for that. But thank you. Her. I could talk and talk and talk about the goddesses because they are the reason. And what also, just to, because we're now coming up to 9 o'clock, just to say, like I told you, I started with the goddesses back in 2006. But when I look back, is I also trained as a makeup artist. And while I was doing my training, I was also working at London Airport in the duty-free shops, and where I was working on the electrical counter, and next door to the electrical counter was the Christian Dior stand. And because they knew I was doing makeup training, although I will state I was doing special effects, so it wasn't so much beauty makeup, it was special effects. But anyway, they used to ask me to sometimes manage the stand if the ladies went for a break. And on numerous occasions, I can't tell you how many women said, what is your opinion? And I'm asking you because I trust your opinion more than I would one of the ladies. Equally, over the years, I've had women say to me they would always, they prefer to go to see a male hairdresser because they would trust his. Because when I question, and it's like, there's always this suspicion that a woman, whether it's advising on makeup or hair or whatever, will never be quite honest. Like, you walk out of the changing rooms and the assistant says, wow, you look amazing. Whereas if you actually just to watch the little cartoon bubble coming out of here, it's like, you look awful. So it's interesting, and so when I started working with the goddess and understanding the feminine, it came back to, I remembered those experiences of working kind of like and hearing those comments, and it's been reinforced over the years, not just with makeup, but also hairdress. And so many women have said, oh yeah, I'd much prefer to go and see a man for this, because I just wouldn't quite trust I would get an honest opinion for me to look my best. So that's one of what I call the subtle wounds of what women do to women. And this is also one of the reasons why people have asked me and keep saying, when are you going to do the gods? When are you going to do the gods? Not yet. We're not there yet. There's so much more still to do in the feminine. And also, we've done the gods for too many, we've done those for 2,000 years. It's time to bring back. We can't just talk about the fact and say, oh yes, now let's do the gods. Anyway, thank you very much. Like I said, there is going to be a replay, so you can watch this again. It is going to be on kind of YouTube. It will be, if you search Multiverse Academy on YouTube, and I'm sure you'll get an email about that. And equally, there is a link in the chat, so you can sign. The course starts, I think it's the 20th. Yes, because it's Tuesday. I think it's Tuesday the 20th, and then it's 3 hours on a Tuesday and Thursday, and 20th and 22nd, and then the following week, Tuesday and Thursday. So we do so it's 12 hours. Oh, there we go. 19th and the 21st, 26th, and no, that's no. We're past July. Anyway, I was suddenly thinking, I've got a time lapse here. I'm in Persephone's world and gone back in time. We've gone back in time to July. No, it's in September. So thank you very much for joining. I hope you will certainly kind of have a different version of kind of like the goddesses, and think about what goddess could you be, who's influencing your life, and interestingly, whenever we talk about the goddesses, it's like you stir a bit like the collective pot. So it's always interesting to pay attention to your dreams, because I often find that when we've talked about goddesses, people often have quite goddess-like dreams. They kind of show up in different shapes and forms. But what I would say is just pay attention to your dream, because maybe the goddess that you are is the one that's going to show up in your dream. Thank you, Lisa. So enjoy your goddess, celebrate being a goddess. Yeah. So Ashley, who is behind the screens, do you want to say anything? Or are we ending here? Thank you. And Leia, I did see, Leia, just while you're here, I did see your message in Instagram, and I will reply. Great.